In the name of the living God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Malcolm Guite, who is a contemporary priest in the Church of England, is the finest living poet in the world. And he doesn't need my endorsement. Actually, the publishers are lining up to publish his works. But he nonetheless has it. In his poem, The Bread of Life, Guite offers this very keen observation. Now, cue in. Where to get bread? Question mark. An ever-pressing question that trembles on the lips of anxious mothers. Bread for their families, bread for all these others. A whole world on the margin of exhaustion. And where that hunger has been satisfied, the question still returns. In our abundance, something starves still and yearns. We crave fulfillment, but often are denied. Now, if a poet's pen is not your thing, Mick Jagger always makes sense. He summed it up like this. You can fill in the blank. I can't get no satisfaction. This little sermon is about hunger and craving and satisfaction and fulfillment based on the words of Jesus in the gospel appointed today. Jesus said, I am the bread of life, and he who comes to me shall never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never thirst. My first task is to convince you, the dear listener, that you're really, really hungry. And I don't mean hungry for breakfast. But if that strikes a chord with you right now, because I know you've all been fasting before Mass, if that strikes a chord with you, go ahead and indulge that craving. Just use it as a metaphor and get in touch with what you're hungry for the most in your life today. The Bible uses the hunger and thirst metaphor or motif from cover to cover, by the way. The scriptures begin and end with the story of man's hunger and thirst. In Genesis, Adam and Eve's hunger to be like God. Why did they eat the forbidden fruit? Because they were hungry. And in the closing chapters of the Revelation to St. John, God himself declares, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is thirsty from the water, the fountain of life." You are feeling very thirsty now. You are very hungry. Hungry like a wolf. That's Duran Duran. And this was called the setup. You've just been set up. So here we go. What would it take for you to finally be satisfied in life? What would it take to finally make you, even you, happy? Now, for decades, even centuries, it was the accumulation of more and more stuff that promised satisfaction. That's the whole premise of consumerism, right? The more I have, the happier I will become. Interestingly, however, it was John D. Rockefeller, the world's first billionaire, who was once asked, "How much is enough?" And curiously, he replied, "Just a little bit more." And what he said in that moment was a profound statement about the human condition, that we are wired to want. It doesn't even have to be about wanting more. Lately, it's actually cool to want less. If you are a If you're a Gen Xer or a millennial, for example, you think it's cool and you want to minimize and simplify. You want that charming 180 square foot tiny house you saw on HGTV for a mere $649,000. Did you know the person who buys a tiny house lives there on average less than 3 months before upsizing to a normal size house? So whether you want more or less today, the point is the same. We hunger. We thirst for things to be different. This is true beyond the material realm, of course. It certainly is true in close relationships, at work and at play, in trains or in shops or at tea, to quote a beloved hymn. Down through the ages, Christian theologians, saints, and preachers and writers wiser than I have all concluded that God alone can satisfy. That's certainly what the Bible sets forth. But what I'm craving, there goes that word, but what I am craving today, as it were, lies beyond declaratory language. Just stick with me. I need today, and you need today, concrete, prescriptive language, steps that we can take, quenching spiritual thirst for dummies, if you will. Recently, in a casual setting with a priest who is also a close friend, I described something secular that I've put way too much energy in achieving to no avail. And you know what he said to me? Almost on cue, he quoted St. Augustine to me. He said, Charleston, very piously, remember, the heart is restless until it rests in the Lord. I know that. I know that is true in the absolute. But when you are totally frustrated, descriptive language can feel like a lecture and no relief. When your dear friend from college, exactly your age, dropped dead last year from heart failure related to his lifestyle, your wife said to you, I hope this was a wake-up call for you, sweetie. Now, she was absolutely 100% correct, as she always is. But because it felt like judgment, it was only diagnostic, not curative. Big difference. My daughter Camille and I found ourselves literally feeling very hungry and thirsty, waiting in a long line at Shake Shack last year in Washington, D.C., when suddenly someone jumped in front of us and cut cue. I said something rather unbecoming about the individual. You're surprised? And Camille offered the following diagnosis. Why even bother being a priest, Dad, if you hate people? All diagnosis, no cure. I had this babysitter when I was a little boy. She was a little bit of a holy roller. She kept coming back into my room, finding me awake after she told me to go to bed many times. Caught red-handed, I kept saying, I'm just checking under my bed for a monster. This happened probably 4 or 5 times before she entered the room, came over and sat calmly on the bedside with me and told me, Charleston, once you realize the monster is inside of you, you won't have to look elsewhere. Now, again, she was absolutely right. And actually very biblical. That's what the Bible teaches about humanity. But she gave me no way to de-monster. So what works? How can your deepest spiritual hunger actually be satisfied today? How can you prove Mick Jagger wrong? I've told some of you the story of when I was a little boy and got separated from my mother at Parisian's department store at the River Chase Galleria in Birmingham, Alabama. It was their semi-annual sale at their flagship store, so we dutifully made the 2-hour by car pilgrimage from Linden all the way up to Birmingham so she could shop. God rest her soul, but shopping was an Olympic sport to her. She was a 10-time gold medalist if there ever was one. The department store arranged what looked like to be miles and miles of clothing on these racks, and they set it out in a way that looked like a giant maze to a young kid who couldn't even see over the coat hangers. She told me when we walked in there, "Stay right beside my side." But I wasn't satisfied. I had a hunger and a thirst for adventure even then. So I wandered off and quickly got hopelessly lost. This was also just about the time when Stranger Danger came out. And when Stranger Danger came out, it was more feared than nuclear proliferation and quicksand combined. So I began crying and screaming for her, and worse, I could hear her calling out for me. But every turn I took was a dead end, just more clothing, and she wasn't there. Finally, I heard her say these words to me, "Be still. I'm coming to you." She found me straight away, and I have never felt more satisfied in my entire life. I desperately, out of desperation, searched for a path to my mother. But the exact moment I trusted her enough to stand still, she found me. Have you tried that very thing with God? Whatever you're facing today is worth a try. The takeaway is simply this: when I have nothing left, the bread comes to me. He comes to you. For all that is truly noble and laudable and commendable about seeking and searching for God, it can, in many situations, be nobler still to experience divine rescue, to be found by Him. After all, Jesus is the living bread that came down from heaven to find all who are lost, lonely, anxious, or miserable in any way. And whoever eats this bread will live